Trump will jail you. That's the threat Kash Patel threw across the room like a grenade. But what came next? Jasmine Crockett didn't panic. She didn't flinch. She delivered a cold, fearless response that turned the entire moment on its head and silenced everyone, including Patel himself. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't said in passing. It was launched like a political grenade across the room by Kash Patel, a man known not only for his fierce loyalty to Trump, but for his sharp tongue and blunt threats. He wasn't smiling when he said it. He was dead serious. The room shifted. People froze. You could hear the air change, and the target of that warning, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising Democratic figure, known not only for her sharp legal mind but her refusal to back down. This wasn't just a clash of ideology. This was a warning fired straight at her, with the full weight of political retaliation behind it. Let's back up. The room was already tense. It was one of those high-stakes moments in Washington where party lines are visible not just in arguments, but in posture, in glances, in who refuses to look at whom. The topic was hot. Emotions were high. And then came Patel's words like a strike of lightning in a quiet storm. Trump will jail you. The line wasn't casual. It wasn't debate. It wasn't a prediction. It sounded more like a promise. And not just to Crockett, but to everyone in the room watching. To everyone who had dared to stand on the other side of Trump's path, whether in courts, in Congress, or in public. Kash Patel isn't just a talking head. He's been close to Trump's inner circle. He knows how to deliver a message, and this one was deliberate. The threat didn't come wrapped in legal jargon or political code. It was raw. It was personal. It was meant to land hard, and it did. What made it even more chilling was the way it was said, not yelled, not ranted, but spoken plainly, like a statement of fact, as if it was already in motion, as if the machine had already been set in gear, and Crockett was just the first to hear it out loud. But this story isn't about a threat. It's about what happened after. The expectation in the room was obvious. Crockett, being on the receiving end of that line, was supposed to react, maybe with shock, maybe with anger, maybe with fear. That's what makes threats powerful, the reaction they provoke. Except she didn't. There was no panic, no flinch, no sudden rise of voice. Crockett didn't even blink. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable. At that moment, something changed. The balance in the room shifted. You could almost see people looking around, unsure of what would happen next. The silence was so thick it was almost oppressive. And Patel, for all his confidence, for all his bluster, seemed to hesitate just for a moment as he realized this wasn't going the way he expected. Crockett had been put on the spot. She'd been publicly threatened with jail by someone closely tied to a powerful political machine. But what Patel didn't realize is that Crockett didn't view the moment as a crisis. She saw it as a test, and she was ready. Before she even spoke, her calm body language said everything. She wasn't caught off guard. She had seen this before. The strongman tactics, the courtroom threats, the attempts to silence, and she knew exactly how to dismantle it. The crowd, the staffers, even a few lawmakers across the aisle, leaned in. Not because they expected a war of words, but because they sensed something rare was about to happen. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. It was going to be a moment of political steel meeting political fire. And Crockett, she was holding the flame. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. She didn't even lean back in surprise. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat there in absolute stillness, staring at Kash Patel, who had just threatened her, not with political defeat, not with criticism, but with jail. A threat like that, delivered so bluntly, so publicly, was supposed to rattle anyone. But Crockett wasn't just anyone. What Patel didn't expect was her response. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't emotional. It was calculated, controlled, devastating. "Is that what justice looks like to you?" she asked, her voice smooth, deliberate, and cold. You could feel the entire room pause. Her tone wasn't confrontational. It was clarifying, almost surgical. She wasn't matching Patel's aggression. She was cutting through it with something much more dangerous. Certainty. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, her eyes steady. "Let me understand this clearly," she continued. "You believe that disagreement should be punished with prison." It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a challenge, a trap, laid in plain sight. And Patel, the man known for never backing down, suddenly looked like he was trying to think 2 steps ahead. But Crockett was already 5 steps past him. "Because if that's what you're saying," she added, "then you're not talking about law and order. You're talking about political revenge." And that line, that simple phrase, hit harder than any insult ever could. Crockett's tone stayed level. She wasn't reacting with rage, because this wasn't an emotional moment for her. It was a principled one. In that instant, she wasn't speaking just for herself. She was channeling something bigger. She was speaking for every official, every journalist, every citizen who had ever been told to shut up or face consequences. She was speaking for the idea that power isn't permission to punish dissent. When justice becomes personal, it stops being justice, she said. When political power is used to silence, it stops being leadership and starts becoming tyranny. She wasn't reading from a script. This was raw thought, filtered through legal experience and moral clarity. She had seen real justice, and she knew that threats weren't part of it. Around the room, the energy shifted again. People weren't just listening, they were stunned. Not by shouting, not by theatrics, but by the power of calm conviction. Crockett had flipped the script. Patel had tried to dominate the moment with a warning, but Crockett turned that warning into a mirror, one that forced everyone in the room to ask, "What exactly are we applauding here?" And she didn't stop there. "Let me be clear," she said. "If your side believes that political disagreement should end in handcuffs, then your fight isn't with me, it's with the Constitution." That line, it hit the core of the moment. It wasn't just about Crockett versus Patel, it was about democracy versus fear, and for that moment, she owned it. Patel sat quieter now. The confidence in his threat had cracked, not visibly, not loudly, but you could feel it, because his weapon had failed. His threat had landed, but it hadn't shaken her. Instead, it gave her a platform to remind the room and everyone watching what leadership really looks like. Not loud, not cruel, not vengeful, but clear, calm, and unafraid. "Threats don't move me," she said finally, "because my oath wasn't to a man, it was to a country and to its laws." That sentence hung in the air like a final blow. You could have heard a pin drop. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a statement, the kind that draws a line in the sand. Crockett didn't come to play defense. She came to remind people why threats don't win in a system built on principles. To understand how explosive Kash Patel's threat really was, you have to understand what's been brewing beneath the surface of Washington. Because that moment, the 6 words, "Trump will jail you," didn't just come from one man with a loud mouth. It reflected something deeper, something colder, and something far more dangerous. Across political circles, there's been a shift. Not a loud one, not always visible, but it's there. You can feel it in the way certain figures talk, in how they carry themselves. In the thinly veiled language of punishment and power, the message is subtle but unmistakable. We're back, and we're keeping receipts. Kash Patel has long been one of Trump's fiercest allies. He speaks with a kind of confidence that only comes from knowing he has powerful backing. So when he looked across the table at Jasmine Crockett and warned her, seriously warned her that jail was coming, it wasn't just him talking, it was a signal. A signal that political retaliation wasn't just being whispered behind closed doors, it was being said out loud, in public, with no fear of consequence. That's what made the moment so chilling. It wasn't just about Crockett, it was about what the threat represented, a future where political disagreement is treated like a crime. Patel didn't bother to hide it. There was no coded language. He wasn't implying she might be wrong. He wasn't warning her about policy consequences. He was saying flat out, "If you challenge our power, we'll put you in a cell." That's not a warning from a rival. That's the language of authoritarian power. And Jasmine Crockett, she saw it immediately. She didn't respond like someone shocked by the idea. She responded like someone who had known this moment was coming and had prepared for it. Her response wasn't about herself. It was about something much bigger. "If disagreement becomes a J-label offense," she said, "then we're not talking about justice, we're talking about submission." She wasn't playing politics. She was pulling the curtain back on a movement that has stopped pretending to care about fairness. The threat from Patel revealed a mindset, one where the law is not a shield for the people, but a sword for the powerful. The idea is simple: if you're not with us, you're an enemy. And enemies should be punished, not debated, not persuaded, punished. This is where Crockett's clarity became dangerous, not for her, but for the people trying to silence her, because in one moment, she took Patel's threat and exposed it for what it was: not justice, not law, not accountability, but pure political intimidation. "You don't scare me," she said, "because fear isn't law, and threats aren't truth." Those weren't just good lines, they were a shield, not just for herself, but for anyone watching who needed a reminder that standing tall in the face of power is still possible. It's no secret that in recent years, the political environment has grown more hostile. Lines that were once considered sacred, like the line between law enforcement and political grudges, are being blurred more and more. What Kash Patel said out loud is something others have only hinted at, that the law might be used not as a tool of justice, but as a weapon of revenge. But what makes this moment matter is that Crockett didn't flinch. She reminded the room, and anyone paying attention, that the point of public office isn't to protect yourself. It's to protect the idea that government exists for the people, not to dominate them, not to silence them, and certainly not to jail them for having a voice. Her final point in that section drove it home. "I wasn't elected to play nice with power. I was elected to check it." And with those words, Crockett turned what was supposed to be a warning into a warning of her own. Democracy only dies when people stop speaking, and she's not done speaking. Kash Patel came into that room expecting to dominate. He's not new to confrontation. In fact, Patel thrives on it, built a name for himself being brash, loud, and loyal to one man above all else. He's the type who walks into a room with his chin up and gloves off. When he said Trump will jail you, he wasn't floating a theory. He was throwing a punch, a political uppercut aimed straight at Jasmine Crockett. But here's what no one expected. Crockett didn't swing back. She didn't even move, and that's what beat him, because this wasn't a shouting match. This wasn't two politicians yelling over each other trying to score cheap points. This wasn't theater. This was a battle of nerve. And Crockett had the steel. Instead of responding emotionally, she responded like someone who had been down this road before, maybe not with the same words, maybe not with the same stakes, but with the same attempt to bully her into silence. And like she had done time and again, she met it not with fury but with facts, principles and poise. She didn't just refuse to be shaken, she dismantled the whole performance Patel had staged, piece by piece. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice low and steady. "You believe the justice system should be used as a personal weapon against people you disagree with politically." It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was a setup, because if Patel said yes, he exposed the authoritarian impulse behind his words, and if he said no, he'd have to explain what exactly he meant by his threat. And in that moment he had no answer, no soundbite, no defense, just silence. That's the power of not flinching. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows exactly what they stand for and doesn't need to shout it. And Crockett, she stood, like AWOL.com, composed, unbreakable. The power dynamic flipped instantly. Patel had walked in thinking he could intimidate, but Crockett made it clear the louder he got, the smaller he looked. She then delivered one of the cleanest lines of the entire confrontation. "If your idea of law and order is locking up your critics, then you're not defending democracy. You're mocking it." There was no comeback for that because it wasn't an opinion, it was a reality check. Crockett's refusal to escalate robbed Patel of the drama he thrives on. He wanted fire, he got ice. He wanted outrage, he got intellect. And that's what shut the room down. People talk a lot about owning the moment. What Crockett did was rarer. She commanded it without theatrics, without applause, lines. She simply spoke with such clarity and confidence that no one, not even her opponent, dared interrupt. And that silence, that stillness, that wasn't weakness, that was control. Crockett's.com didn't just protect her dignity, it forced everyone in the room to face an uncomfortable truth that maybe the real danger isn't from those being threatened, but from those doing the threatening. Her approach was strategic, intentional, a masterclass in how to answer power, not with panic, but with purpose. She wasn't just defending herself from an accusation, she was exposing the strategy behind it, a growing trend where fear is used to silence, where loudness replaces leadership, where justice becomes a blunt object rather than a balanced scale. And by refusing to play that game, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a moment. She made a point that stuck with every single person watching. If calm truth can silence a threat, imagine what courage can do to power. This wasn't just a viral moment. This wasn't just a back and forth between two political figures. This was a window into something deeper, a shift in the way power is being discussed, and the dangerous path some are openly willing to walk down. Kash Patel's threat wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was clear, deliberate, and chilling. "Trump will jail you." And that statement reveals something far more disturbing than just personal hostility. It reveals a mindset, a belief system. One where disagreement isn't just unwelcome, it's punishable. One where opposition isn't countered with arguments but crushed with institutions. One where the law is not a tool for justice, but a weapon for revenge. And if that becomes normalized, if it's accepted that those in power can use the state to punish critics, then we're not living in the same democracy we think we are. That's what Jasmine Crockett understood instantly. Her response didn't just diffuse a threat, it exposed the rot underneath it. She didn't respond with fear because she recognized exactly what Patel's words were trying to do. They weren't just targeting her, they were targeting the idea that people can still speak truth to power without being punished for it. "I won't be intimidated by noise pretending to be law," she said. And that single sentence revealed the real battle, not between parties, but between principles. This wasn't about Democrat versus Republican. This was about power versus accountability, about whether the justice system serves the people or the people in charge. And Crockett, in that moment, stood up not just for herself, but for every person watching who's ever wondered, can anyone push back? The answer she gave, not just in words but in presence, was yes, and I just did. That's what makes this moment matter, because while many politicians talk about courage, Jasmine Crockett showed it, not in a rally, not in a press conference, but in real time, when it counted most. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't storm out, she didn't even flinch. She looked political intimidation in the face and said no. If the goal is to scare people like me into silence, I have bad news. I'm not going anywhere. That wasn't defiance, that was duty. Because the role of an elected official, any public servant, isn't to play along with threats, it's to confront them. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who can't afford to speak up. This moment between Patel and Crockett wasn't scripted, it wasn't staged. And that's exactly why it landed with such force, because it showed, clearly and honestly, what's at stake in the years ahead. Not just elections, not just headlines, but the very definition of justice itself. Crockett's stance sent a clear message: if you try to use power to silence, you might just expose your own weakness, because real strength isn't in control. It's in restraint, it's in truth, and most of all, it's in the refusal to back down when everything is pushing you to fold. In that room, the temperature dropped, not because of anger, but because everyone realized they had just witnessed someone stand for something unshakable. And that silence, that moment of stillness after Crockett finished speaking, that wasn't emptiness. That was respect. Because she didn't just survive the threat, she reversed it. And in doing so, reminded the country of one powerful truth. When fear walks into the room, conviction doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand.